It is true that we don't often think of the national security advisors having first and foremost a portfolio that is about domestic politics. And yet, by your account, the extent to which Henry Kissinger wanted to not think about domestic politics as he thought about the U.S. strategy, when many in other places have argued that actually the center of the gravity for the United States in the Vietnam War was domestic political opinion, comes across as a major strategic weakness. I don't know if that's...
I think that's perfectly stated. I think one of the themes of the book, I hope one of the themes of the book that people pick up, is that policy in Vietnam was always about the United States and very rarely about South Vietnam or any Vietnamese or anybody from Cambodia or Laos, that it was all about domestic considerations and political credibility and even some international credibility, but there was always this domestic component to it, and that cuts several different ways as well. I mean, Kissinger's timeline, Kissinger sets the timeline for the secret negotiations. He wants to deliver a peace agreement to Nixon before the 1972 election, even after Nixon says, no, I don't want it. Kissinger still pushed it and would go into meetings in Paris and say, we've got to have this before October 15th so that I can give this to the president. He wants it very badly, and then you look in the notes and the dialogues back and forth between Kissinger and Nixon saying, I don't want it. That's the last thing I want. So there's really a kind of a disconnect through this all. There's another area that I want to make sure I get this in because it's the most important part, I think, of the book perhaps. And that is Kissinger met secretly with his North Vietnamese counterparts dozens of times. We have transcripts written by Kissinger's associates, notes taken by Kissinger's associates, verbatim. We also have, I have the Vietnamese version of those meetings. So I've translated that, I compare them. They're remarkable for how similar they are. So we now have a very good, solid record. John Carland, who works in the historian's office at the State Department, has just published a volume in the Foreign Relations series that captures the Kissinger and Le Duc Thi negotiations. And so we have that. It picks up on some of this and adds a little bit in other places. So the record of what was said in these secret meetings is pretty clear. What's remarkable is that after each one of these, Nixon received on his desk a summary from Kissinger. And these summaries do not reflect at all what was said in the meetings. And Nixon makes strategic decisions based on what Kissinger is telling him. Classic Kissinger lines about these and the summaries are, the North Vietnamese are finally ready to negotiate. This is the best meeting we've ever had. They're getting really close to agreeing to withdrawing their troops. Le Duc Thi said X, Y, and Z, and it's always very foggy. Usually with Kissinger, it said that his counterparts left out an attack, and that gave him the evidence he needed that they were softening their position. Then you go to the transcript, and no such conversation ever took place. So I don't know how far down the line readers will want to go with that, but for me, deceiving the President of the United States, even if it's Richard Nixon, deceiving the President, deceiving that office with summaries of negotiation when Americans are fighting and dying, and the President is going to make decisions based on those conversations, that gives me pause. Now, the only thing that maybe squares that circle a little bit is that Nixon never had much faith in Kissinger or the secret talks. So I don't know how much policy he really was making from that, but if I heard that the North Vietnamese were interested in a mutual troop withdrawal, I might behave this way. But they never hinted, the North Vietnamese, the Vietnamese Communist Party, would never admit that their troops were in South Vietnam to begin with, because they didn't recognize the political legitimacy of South Vietnam. So to them, their troops didn't need to go anywhere. Their troops were on home soil. So they, at no point, I can say this with extreme confidence, at no point did Le Duc Thi or Xuan Tay ever even remotely hint that PAVN troops would be removed from South Vietnam before an agreement, during an agreement, or after an agreement. And in fact, in the end, Kissinger conceded on that point and not only allowed the infiltration to stay where it was, but allowed 10 main force infantry divisions of the PAVN, North Vietnamese Army, to stay in South Vietnam after the Easter offensive. So they pour tens of thousands of new troops in, and Kissinger, by agreement in the document, allows those troops to stay there. That causes Hanoi to say, well, look, the only sticking point we have now in an agreement was the South Vietnamese government. We wanted them out, you insisted they stay, but now that you're letting our troops stay here, we'll take them out ourselves. You get out, and then we'll run over Saigon. And that's the agreement Kissinger signed, and that's what happened.